In 1902, a government chemist started feeding poisons to healthy volunteers to prove something the food industry desperately wanted to hide. Dr. Harvey Wiley didn't set out to become a martyr. He set out to answer a simple question: what exactly was America eating? By the early 1900s, the answer was terrifying. Ketchup contained formaldehyde. Butter was diluted with lard and animal fat. Milk was preserved with borax and salicylic acid, chemicals so toxic they'd burn your mouth going down. And the worst part, nobody was breaking the law. There were no laws to break. Wiley was chief chemist at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and he'd spent years documenting the fraud. He'd analyzed thousands of food samples. He'd published reports nobody read. Congress ignored him. The food industry called him an alarmist. So in 1902, Wiley made a decision that would either vindicate his warnings or end his career. He was going to prove food additives were poisoning Americans by poisoning them himself. He recruited 12 young men, all government employees, all volunteers. They were told they'd be fed common food additives in controlled doses. They were told it was for science. They weren't told it might kill them. The press called them the Poison Squad. The name stuck because it was accurate. Now, before you dismiss this as reckless, and it was, understand the context. Medical ethics as we know them didn't exist yet. Informed consent wasn't standard practice. And Wiley believed the risk was justified because the alternative was worse. Millions of Americans eating poison without knowing it, with no one in power willing to stop it. The experiment began in a basement kitchen beneath the Department of Agriculture building. Every meal was identical. Every additive was measured. Every volunteer's reaction was documented. Borax came first. It was used to preserve meat, butter, and canned goods. Within days, the men reported nausea, headaches, and abdominal pain. Some vomited. Some couldn't eat. One man said his mouth felt like it was on fire. The food industry's response was predictable. They called the experiment propaganda. They said Wiley was exaggerating. They claimed the doses were unrealistic, that no one actually ate that much borax in a single meal. They weren't wrong about the doses. But that was precisely Wiley's point. The problem wasn't one meal. It was accumulation. Borax in your butter, your meat, your bread, your milk, day after day, year after year. The volunteers kept going. Benzoic acid was next, used as a preservative in everything from condiments to canned fruit. Headaches returned. Diarrhea became chronic. One volunteer lost 20 pounds. Another developed what he described as a burning sensation in his stomach that wouldn't stop. Wiley documented it all. He published the results. Congress still didn't act. Here's where the skeptic in you should pause. Wiley had a motive to prove his point and force Congress to regulate food. The food industry had a motive too to discredit him. So who was lying? The evidence suggests Wiley was exaggerating the severity, but not the danger. Modern toxicology confirms that borax and benzoic acid at high doses are harmful. The question was never whether they were toxic. It was whether they were toxic at the levels Americans actually consumed. But Wiley had something the industry didn't: the press. Newspapers loved the Poison Squad. It was sensational, yes, but it was also real. Readers saw young men getting sick for their country. They saw a government scientist willing to risk his career for the truth. They saw an industry that would rather deny the problem than solve it. Public pressure mounted. Women's groups demanded regulation. Muckraking journalists published exposés. Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle, detailing horrors in the meatpacking industry that made the Poison Squad's findings look quaint. In 1906, Congress finally passed the Pure Food and Drug Act. It wasn't perfect. It didn't ban all additives, but it required food to be labeled honestly. It created the FDA. It was the beginning of actual oversight. Wiley didn't get everything he wanted. He pushed for a complete ban on all food additives. Congress refused. A compromise was reached. Manufacturers had to prove additives were safe or they couldn't use them. It sounds basic now. In 1906, it was revolutionary. The burden of proof had shifted. For the first time, the industry had to justify what they were putting in food, not the other way around. Now the counterargument is worth stating clearly. Wiley's experiment was unethical by modern standards. His volunteers weren't fully informed. The doses were deliberately extreme. The publicity was designed to manipulate public opinion. All of that's true, and all of it was also necessary, because the alternative, waiting for perfect science and perfect ethics while millions were poisoned, wasn't an option. The Poison Squad was disbanded after Wiley's experiments ended. The volunteers recovered, though some reported lingering effects for years. Wiley left the USDA in 1912, frustrated that the FDA wasn't aggressive enough in enforcement. He spent his final years writing, lecturing, and advocating for stronger regulations. He died in 1930, never seeing the full scope of what he'd started. The real twist isn't that Wiley won. It's that he only won halfway. The food industry didn't disappear. It just got smarter. It learned to work within regulation rather than against it. It learned to lobby Congress. It learned that if you can't ban something, you can delay its ban for decades. Today's debates about artificial sweeteners, trans fats, and ultra-processed ingredients are Wiley's war, still being fought. What the Poison Squad actually proved wasn't that one man could change the system. It proved that one man with evidence, combined with public pressure, could force the system to acknowledge the problem existed. Wiley didn't end food fraud, he made it illegal. He didn't eliminate deception, he made it riskier. The machinery of fraud didn't stop. It just had to move underground. The Poison Squad's real legacy isn't about food at all. It's about the pattern we see repeated throughout history: a truth-teller versus an industry, evidence versus denial, and the public caught in the middle. Wiley understood something fundamental. You can't shame a corporation into honesty. You have to make dishonesty more expensive than transparency. The FDA exists because Wiley was willing to poison himself to prove a point. That's the mechanism. That's always been the mechanism. The question that haunts this story isn't whether Wiley was right about the poison. He was. The question is, what would you be willing to risk to prove something the powerful don't want you to know? Wiley risked his reputation, his career, and his volunteers' health. He won, but the victory was incomplete. And it always will be, because fraud doesn't end. It evolves. Subscribe for more cases where a single piece of evidence cracked open an industry's lies. Each week, a new fraud nobody saw coming.